What's the most ridiculous rule you had to follow as a kid? Not rule per se, but my dad scared us so much as kids we would avoid talking to him or asking him questions. Once he told us to play outside while some other adult was at the house. It was a cold, snowy winter day. We played for a while and then got cold, but none of us wanted to be the one to ask him to go back inside. We sat outside for hours until it got dark, and he came looking for us because we were afraid. I don't think I've ever been so cold again. I remember my hands and feet were numb, and it hurt like crazy to warm them up again.
That sounds rough. It's funny how fear can keep you outside in the cold. I had a similar experience with my friend. We were too scared to ask for help once when we got lost in the woods. We just wandered around until it got dark. Eventually, we found our way back, but being scared and freezing outside is a memory that sticks with you. Makes you think twice about asking for help.
At one of my earlier jobs, I had to follow a lunch bell like I was in school. Except I worked in the lab, and sometimes the testing I had to do made me miss the lunch bell, and so I would eat later. People reported me, so I ended up delaying testing to meet the lunch. Production went down a lot, but at least I followed the lunch bell.
That sounds like a unique setup. It's strange to think of a lab being run like a school. I guess following the rules matters, but sometimes you have to prioritize the work. Missing out on tests just to eat with everyone else seems unnecessary. It's a tough balance between getting the job done and sticking to a schedule. Interesting how that shift affected production.
If I went out with friends on a Friday or Saturday, I couldn't go out again that weekend. Similar rules for during the week too. I was a straight-A student, always had homework and chores done, had a job, and my friends, and I would almost always go out during the day to hike or go swimming and come back pretty early and definitely before curfew. Like, why was there a limit? It pissed me off so bad as a kid, and still does TBH.
I get that. Having those limits can feel really unfair, especially when you're responsible. Balancing school, work, and a social life is tough, and it seems like you were doing it well. Those weekend rules probably felt like they held you back from enjoying more time with friends. It's interesting how those restrictions stick with you. Looking back, it makes sense to feel a bit frustrated about it.
My school had a ban on hats. Had police officers come in and do a whole presentation on how they're used to show gang affiliation, and you could have the wrong hat on, be walking down the street, and suddenly boom, hamburger. Naturally, this resulted in some of us revolting against this unfair rule by finding secluded spots in the school to hang out and wear our hats like real rebels, grinning, squinting face. We'd sit in this one alcove of a corner and have someone posted up to keep watch for campus security and everything.
Seems like a classic school move. The whole ban on hats felt extreme, but I get why some of us tried to push back. I remember hiding in those corners too, feeling like we were pulling off some secret mission. The watch system was ridiculous, but it made it more fun. We definitely felt like rebels in our own little world, even if it was just over a hat. Simple times.
At school, no shorts, sandals, jeans, shirts without sleeves past the armpit, no tight pants, no makeup or jewelry, limited amount of selected books you were allowed to reach. Wednesdays you always wore nice dresses. Darn, and crap got you detention. Not allowed to watch PG or above movies unless you were in 8th grade. No discussion around anything mental illness related.
That sounds like a strict environment. I remember a school with similar rules. We had to wear uniforms and keep everything pretty basic. It really felt like they were trying to control our self-expression. The no makeup and jewelry rule was pretty weird too. Some kids really struggled with it. It made the whole place feel more like a prison than a school sometimes. But I guess we found ways to cope, like sneaking stuff in.
I wasn't allowed to go out and play with my friends on Sundays, as Sundays was family day. Except my parents rarely took us out on Sundays, maybe like 2 to 3 times in a year, and usually it was just to go to the nearby park. And at home, the only form of entertainment that we had was the one TV, which my parents decided what to watch. So I basically just sat in the living room all Sunday, bored out of my mind, waiting for the day to end.
That sounds pretty familiar. Sundays could be the longest days. It's tough when you can't go out and do anything fun with friends. Just sitting around waiting for the day to wrap up can feel endless. I remember feeling the same way. Watching whatever was on TV didn't really help. You just end up counting down the hours till Monday.
No talking at the dinner table. Every meal had to be eaten in silence. We couldn't talk when our parents were watching TV, either, so 5 days a week once Dad came home, we could only talk when we were in our bedrooms. It's ridiculous because Mom always bragged to her friends about how much family time was respected in our home. There were no ready meals in front of the TV or anything. Every meal was in the dining room, and everyone in the family ate together with no distractions. She would insist that it was important to spend time every day with the family, but we never spoke. It was just Mom and Dad having a conversation between themselves unless they asked you a specific question. How is that family time?
That sounds pretty tough. I get the idea of wanting to have family meals together, but if no one's really talking, what's the point? It's like everyone's just in the same room, but no one's really connecting. I guess it can feel like a routine more than a bonding experience. If you're all just silent, it's hard to feel like a cohesive unit. Family time should involve actual communication, not just being physically present.
I used to return soda cans and bottles to the grocery stores for spending money as a child. My parents didn't believe in giving an allowance. Neighbors would save them for me, and I earned a lot. My father then told me that from now on, any time the return amount was over $5, I had to give it to my mother for the grocery shopping budget. I still was required to clean and sort them, and I needed permission in order to return them, so it always was over $5. So I had to do all the work collecting, sorting, and cleaning soda bottles and cans only to give the money over for groceries.
That's a classic story. Sounds like a pretty rough deal as a kid. You put in all that effort only to hand over the cash. It definitely teaches some lessons about work and responsibility, though. At least you got some experience with managing money early on. It's kind of funny in a way, like, no reward for your hustle, just more chores.
I didn't ask my mom for anything unless I absolutely had to. Asking my dad was out, because he'd either blow up 80% of the time or tell me to ask my mom. I got detentions because I was too afraid to ask my parents to sign school documents that were required. Somehow, they didn't explode on me about detention the way they would about me telling them I was feeling sad.
It's tough when you feel like you can't talk to your parents. I had a friend who was in a similar situation. He'd just keep everything bottled up, thinking it would be easier. But then he ended up getting overwhelmed. In the end, he found a teacher he could trust and started talking things out. It really helped him cope with everything he was feeling.
I grew up with something similar-ish. Other drinks were fine, but you always had a glass of milk at dinner that you were expected to drink, unless out to dinner or something. I never really thought about it at all. It was just a standard part of a meal. It's just what you did. I don't do it anymore, but my dad still does. And it's extra weird because he always has a big glass of red wine with dinner too. Wine and milk. Yum.
I get that. Growing up, there were certain expectations at the dinner table. For me, it was juice. Always had to have a glass, no matter what. I don't do it now either, but my parents still stick to their routines. My dad's all about mixing things up too. He'll have soda with his meal and then a glass of wine later. Just different tastes in the end.
I was yelled at for this because I locked the bathroom door of my grandparents' house plus, then couldn't get the door to open back up because the lock jammed or something, so my dad had to come by plus climb in the window to fix it. The window was easily accessible plus their house was within walking distance of home. Dad plus I walked it from there regularly, so I don't feel like this should have been such a big deal, but it was plus I was told I wasn't allowed to lock doors. Years later, my parents plus I moved to a new house. My new bedroom door had a lock with no key, but you could use an ice pick or the inside part of a pin to open it. I always locked it just because I like knowing if someone's about to enter my room. Dad found this annoying because it meant when he ran out of cigarettes in the middle of the night, he'd have to ice pick his way into my room to get to mine. He helped me quit smoking without even trying.
That's a memorable experience. I can relate to the whole locked door thing. It seems innocent, wanting some privacy, but then it turns into this big scene. Your dad definitely had his own little quest for those cigarettes. Funny how those moments stick with you, though. A way to learn boundaries and find out how to navigate family life. It's nice that you both came away with a memory from it.
As kids who constantly brought our N64 down to the living room and used the family TV to play, we were always hooking and unhooking the RCA cable. Stupid kids aren't as gently, and eventually the female side got loose from my little brother always jamming the cord in. Then you would have to wiggle the cord just right to get the video to work, so I get what the extra wear and tear means. But that's part of having kids, Mo.
That sounds pretty relatable. I remember when my friends and I used to set up our consoles all the time in the living room, too. We weren't the best with the cables, always messing around with them. It's funny how those little things can turn into a hassle later, but it's just part of growing up. Those moments just remind you of how much fun we had, even if it was kind of a mess.
Imho, it's good to start the day with some structure and organization. If your bed looks like crap, likely so does the rest of the room. Any 5-second task that keeps a home not looking like it's been ransacked is 5 seconds well spent. It's so quick, simple, and painless, there's no good reason not to do it other than I don't want to.
I get that. I used to let my room go a bit, and it messed with my focus. Just making my bed took a minute, but it made a difference. It's like a small win that sets the tone for the day. If everything's in order, it feels more manageable. It's those little tasks that can clear your mind and make you feel a bit more in control.
You were much nicer than I was about it, smiley face. When it came time to make my confirmation, I refused, and when they forced it, I said, okay, you will have to physically drag me into the church, and I will be yelling Satan is my pal the entire time. I'm in it and definitely would have done so. They knew it, and that was the end of forced religion. It's not hard to understand why I have no children I'd be afraid of getting a rebel like me.
That's quite the stance to take on confirmation. It sounds like you really stood your ground. I can see why you wouldn't want to deal with a kid who might pull something similar. It's kind of humorous, though, how you use such a bold approach to push back against forced religion. Definitely not a situation you'd want to handle as a parent.
Thanks, though I'm not really mad about much of it at this point. I think alexithymia, but as far as I'm aware, it's really all funny ridiculous now. I just have a relatively decent memory of it all since it was all drilled into me. I think I have a great relationship with my dad at this point, but I definitely did not like him back in the day.
Seems like you've come a long way with your dad. It's interesting how time changes our perspective. Looking back, the things that seemed huge can feel pretty trivial now. It's good that you can find humor in it. Relationships can be complicated, but finding a way to understand each other is important.
Reminds me of when I broke the little tab on the lid of my PS1 off, the one that hits a button so the machine knows the cover is closed. I had to roll up a little bit of paper, wedge it in there, close the lid, and put something heavy on top. Always had to jiggle it and finagle it to get it just right.
That sounds frustrating. I remember a time when I had to fix my old Game Boy by using tape to hold the battery in place. It was a hassle, but it worked for a while. Sometimes you just have to get creative with these things. It's funny how we find ways to make things work when we really want to play.
My uncle threatened to do the same with me once when I didn't want to eat sauerkraut. I was a picky eater TBF plus at one point. I'm pretty sure he thought I was anorexic or something because of that. I really don't like sauerkraut plus. I don't think that's too uncommon. I tried shoveling some in my mouth plus, then taking a big swig of water to just swallow it, but that didn't work. Eventually, we kind of came to a truce plus my cousin plus I went back to playing in the snow.
That sounds pretty tense. It's weird how food preferences can lead to those kinds of situations. Not everyone enjoys certain foods, like sauerkraut in your case. It's good you found a way to resolve it and move on. Playing in the snow seems like a solid way to change the mood. Sometimes it's just better to step away and enjoy the moment instead of getting into food battles.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.